Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is my tour through my Penguin Classic wall, where I am encountering a lot of these books and dreaming about organizing them and wondering what is the wheat and what is the chaff. And some of that involves duplicates. I have multiple duplicates all throughout this collection, as we found out yesterday, because yesterday I opined happily about Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville, even though I already talked about it on this channel. Those were duplicates that weren't anywhere near each other. And I had that gently pointed out to me, so I will pull the one that I talked about yesterday and get rid of it. So I only need one copy of the Penguin Classic edition of Democracy in America. I only need one Penguin Classic of anything at all. If it's the exact same edition, then I only need one copy. Penguin has done, for instance, many editions of Beowulf. I want them all. They've done successive editions of major classics, so you'll get one edition of the sketchbook of Washington Irving, and then 30 years later you'll get a different one with a different introduction, different notes, totally different scholastic approach. I want them both. Today, I don't think is an example of that kind, but I can't be 100% sure, and today is a Steve squealer. Yesterday was mighty close. The Democracy in America is a favorite book of mine. I reread it a lot. Today is the Selected Poems of Lord Byron, and that comes much closer to Steve Squeal territory. This is an edition, as you can see. I pull it down all the time. I'm constantly going back to Byron, not only the poetry but also the biography and the letters. This is an edition by Susan Wolfson and Peter Manning. I believe it became a Penguin Classic after a long lifetime on its own, and it takes off from the Murray edition that has Byron's own notes. So you have everything in this volume, almost. Can't call it a complete poetry because not all of Childe Harold is in here. There are excerpts from Childe Harold, but pretty much everything else that Byron wrote that's of any kind of artistic merit, or not, is in here. With enormous notes, an enormous introduction, a timeline of Byron's life, Byron's own notes, explanatory stuff on every single poem that merits it. Just an incredible volume to have in the Penguin Classic line. Just an incredible volume. I don't know how much good it does, because I don't think anybody reads Byron for pleasure anymore. And I'd be willing to bet he's not taught in schools, except in passing. I mean, how much does he have against him? If you look at the 21st century progressive stack, he's pretty much out in the wilderness. He was white, he was from the nobility, he was a womanizer, he was wrote extremely traditional, classically elusive poetry, so it's full of references, it scans metrically, all of that is against him. All of it. He was a living, breathing avatar of the patriarchy. The only thing that he has on his side is that he was a little bit on the lame side. Didn't slow him down at all, but you could include that for intersectionality in the 21st century. It wouldn't be much, and so I don't think it's possible that young people in 2020 will take up Byron. I don't think they will. He also had an extremely picturesque death, but it wasn't when he was extremely young. He was still young, could have lived twice as long as he did, but it wasn't in full flush. It wasn't, in an unforeseen accident. If you march off to war, you could die. So, I mean, it wasn't as bad as Wordsworth, but nevertheless, there's a lot against anyone picking up Byron. What I'm trying to say is, in the 21st century culture where we have propped up and empowered puritanical censors among us, people whose job it is on social media and off social media by brigade calling school boards, self-appointed job is to determine what is permissible to read and what is not, who is canceled and who is not. Since we have propped up those people among us and given them power as opposed to driving them out of the polity, which is what a healthy society always does, it's in their hands whether or not Byron lives or dies, and they obviously won't let him live. I mean, who would do that? What college professor would still have a job if they included significant amounts of Byron in a romantic poetry course, for instance? They would be, the minute that the young undergraduates in that professor's course learned the rumors about Byron's half-sister, the story of how Byron treated his wife and his daughter, the stories about all the mistresses that he took, including the wives and girlfriends of friends of his. the minute a young undergraduate learned that, they would say, well, we don't draw any distinction whatsoever between the artist and the art. In fact, we don't care about the art. We only care about the artist. And if the artist doesn't line up with our political and social views in September of 2020, then they were never any good, and you are a Nazi if you like them. And that won't be just my private opinion. You have tenure only because your school board hasn't revoked it yet, but they can revoke it, in which case you have no money at all. You don't have a job. We can make sure that you don't get hired anywhere else. We can make sure that your wife is drummed out of her job at public health. We can make sure to learn the schools and classroom schedules of your children, all because you have this opinion, all because you dared to put this figure in front of us. Instead of Millicent Tunbridge, who wrote 3 romantic poems at the time when Byron was the most famous writer in the world. Why aren't we studying her instead of him? And if you were to get that question in the classroom, and you were to have the nerve to say, because Byron is much better, he's a much more talented poet than pretty much anyone in his age, certainly than she, so much the worse. If you actually said that in a classroom, in addition to you losing your job, you losing your tenure and your benefits, your wife losing her job, your children being stalked and mocked at school, you could be executed right there by main force in the classroom without even making it to social disgrace. And as long as we have that atmosphere in place, where, at least in America, that is absolutely paramount, especially in American academia, it's absolutely paramount that the artist is the only thing that matters. The art doesn't matter at all. We're not going to pay any attention to the art unless we see ourselves reflected by name in that artwork. So, Midsummer Night's Dream, there are no East Philadelphia steelworkers in Midsummer Night's Dream, you say to your professor, and your professor says, well, yes, you're right. There are rude mechanicals, but there's no East Philadelphia steelworker. You're right. Why would you even bring that up? And you say, my father is an East Philadelphia steelworker, and I'm filming you now saying that he's worthless. As long as that power exists in the world, then people like Byron are at its mercy. So your Penguin Classic for today, minus the homily, is a strong recommend. It's a strong recommend. Get to know this author. I would recommend reading the poetry. I'd also recommend reading a biography. There are 8 million really good biographies of Byron. There are 8 million really bad ones too, leading to a great line in a movie that I mentioned from time to time here on my channel. I mentioned the great old movie, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, the main character of which is determined to buy Gull Cottage, even though it's rumored to be haunted by a dead sea captain, and it is haunted by a dead sea captain, and he inspires her to collaborate with him on a memoir of his life. A man's memoir, a real seagoing memoir called Blood and Swash. And they work hard on the book together, and they get to know each other. And when it's done, she has a manuscript, and she goes to London to bring it to an agent, to bring it to a publisher, to get it published. And when she's waiting, she encounters a louche, worldly wise wolf of a man, is what a previous generation would have called him, who is, unbeknownst to her at the first moment, the author of a series of beloved children's books. He's totally different from the sweet and innocent children's books that he writes. And when he sees that she has a manuscript, he actually draws out the line. Is it a book of dreams? Oh, it isn't another life of Byron, is it? that is meant to reflect the fact that everyone who, in a previous era that was moved by Byron's poetry, people often thought to write lives of him without knowing anything at all about the details of his life. Biographers today don't know the details of his life because they were destroyed. But believe you me, if you read in a short Byron synopsis or a Byron paragraph in a historical magazine or something like that, that he was drummed out of England, that he was socially pressured out of England because of his relationship with his sister, that might not be the whole story. Okay, that might not be the whole story. It might be that there was an even worse slander that could be raised against him, also true, about his relationships with men. Not his sister, or anybody else's wife or mistress, but sexual relationships with men. There are even now details that are curtained, probably forever. So at the time, the lives of Byron that are mocked in The Ghost of Mrs. Muir were plentiful, but also silly. they were really personal reactions to the poetry. And I think you'll find, to wind up your Penguin Classic recommend, I think you'll find that if you read his poetry, you may have personal reactions too. Some of it is actually quite good. The thing you have to remember in 2020 is that the formalism of what he's doing, Byron was an absolute perfect master of poetic form. And by that I mean tempo, rhythm, scansion, the formal stuff of poetry that's completely gone now, the formal stuff of poetry that is not only missing from all poetry written today, but that isn't understood by poets today. They don't have any idea what you're talking about when you talk that way, and they sneer at it. They've never been taught it in school because their parents are lawyers who could hold injunctions against professors for teaching them anything like craft. No, the point of the beats and afterward is that poetry is just about you. It's just navel-gazing. And it doesn't have to have any kind of formal form. It doesn't have to have any kind of scansion. It doesn't have to have any rhythm or readability. It just has to be about you. And anyone who says that that's wrong just doesn't get it. Which is why you can have people in very prominent positions in the literary criticism world. Very prominent positions exclusively about poetry, who literally don't know anything about poetry. They've never read Byron. They've never read Keats or Shelley. They've never read Aeschylus or Euripides. They don't know anything about the history of form. They don't know anything about anything at all except their own poetry, the stuff that they write in an idle afternoon and never rework, and then recite in a bored monotone while checking the messages on their phone to an adoring crowd of tobacco addicts in the Cantab Lounge. That is poetry now. So, and that extends all the way to the top, all the way to some people who have very prominent positions talking about poetry, writing about poetry, don't know anything about it at all. So a Byron recommend is a little bit dodgy because you may be in that position. If you're in the 21st century and you're young, you may know nothing about formal poetry, may never been exposed to it at all. And that's going to matter because, for two reasons. One, because Byron knew everything there was to know about formal poetry and cared a lot about it. He cared a lot about flexing his muscles in various forms and types of poetry to get good at it. Now, he got varying degrees of good at it. He wasn't great at everything he did. But not only did he care about it, that's part number one, but part number two is he expressed himself genuinely through that formalism. And in the 21st century, if you don't know what I'm talking about now, you are going to read Byron and think, well, this is all artificial. This is all Hallmark sentiment. None of this is real because it wouldn't sound this way if it were. And that's not true. That's not true. This is my point. The point I'm trying to make is that the formalism ruled in the day, and Byron knew the formalism better than anybody. But his heart is still in a lot of his verses, even the funny stuff, and quite a bit of it is funny. So I would suggest giving it a try. Byron is one of those authors where you'll have to go in loaded for bear. You'll have to go in forearmed and forewarned. It won't be the same thing as reading a carefree ode by Keats. You need to meet this author a little bit on his own ground. So, for instance, one thing that I would put as an ancillary recommendation would be this very volume. Good Lord, can't do any better. This is Byron in a tub. Read the biography, read the introduction, read the timeline, read and study all the notes to each poem as you go along. That you'll be just fine. These two editors made this volume with that in mind. They made this volume specifically so that this would be all you would need to understand Byron, not just to like him, but to understand him, to meet him on his own ground. So I'd strongly suggest that. But you don't need this. The Daily Penguin does not require that. You don't need this. If you have a copy of Byron already and it is unannotated, just make sure to study up on Wikipedia and a couple of other websites first, so that you have an idea of what's going on. You have an idea of who Byron is, what his world was like, and then dig into his poetry. I'm feeling you may like it more than you think. But anyway, I have no idea. Off the top of my head, I don't remember if we've talked about Byron before. I may have shown this very volume. Yesterday has me rattled a little. 2 Democracies of America. Oh, that's bad. We're going to try. We'll go on tomorrow. We seem to have put to rest the string of duds that we had. I don't mean to call Zola a dud or Fitzgerald, but Democracy in America means a lot to me as a book, and Byron means a lot to me as a writer. As you can tell, I'm looking at this thing on the video and I'm seeing that it's had better days, but that's okay. I will reinforce this, but I definitely want it. We will reconvene tomorrow, or maybe not. There's a chance. Get all up in arms on me here, book 2, but there's a chance that I will skip the Daily Penguin until Monday. because I don't know if you remember, I don't know how closely you're watching current events, but I did a Q&A. We're doing another Q&A for this channel, 7.6K Q&A. One of a barrage of Q&As that will be coming your way this weekend. If I were you, I would set aside some BookTube watching time this weekend because Q&As are great. I mean, I don't know where you people find the questions that you asked me, but this batch was every bit as great as all the other batches. But in addition to that, we have a bunch of channels that are maturing to that admittedly arbitrary and a slightly bit ridiculous, but still meaningful benchmark of 4 digits. We have a number of channels that have crossed the barrier into 4 digits, and they're all doing Q&As. One kind or another, they're all doing Q&As. So I have my 7.6K Q&A questions. They're all great, and I plan on doing those this weekend. That's usually 4 or 5 videos right there. Plus, this is ShakeTube. And there will be Zoom meetings. So I might let the Daily Penguin go until Monday. I don't think that'll be the end of the world. I'll find out. We'll see. I will judge on the ground. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. Who knows what the next Daily Penguin will be? Let's hope it's another thing that puts a smile on Steve's face. All the Penguin Classics should. But we shall see. I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.